Welcome to Game Theorem, where we have serious discussions about absurd entertainment.
Kira, I want to see if you're a true gamer. So I wanted to ask you, what's your favorite video game?
Fortnite, of course. I always win.
Okay, but before that, what was your favorite game before that?
PUBG, winner, winner, chicken dinner.
Okay, but before that?
Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3. I 360 no-scoped all those noobs.
Okay, but before that?
Call of Duty Black Ops 2. I played all the Call of Duty games.
Okay, but before those?
Assassin's Creed. I was jumping around Jerusalem like a maniac.
Okay, but before that?
Smash. I always won all the tournaments.
Okay, but before that?
Pokemon. I even won VGC.
Okay, but before that?
I suppose Tetris. Played Tetris a lot.
A casual game. So you're just some casual game player pretending that you're a real gamer. You're a fake gamer, girl.
I'm Kira.
I'm Kyle. And let's just add that to the list of being the bad guy. Okay, there. Yeah, I just pretend wrote it on my hand.
By the way, none of that's true. I suck at FPS games.
We just wanted to make a point, which was the whole, that's why we do all those skits to begin with, right?
Yeah.
So today we're talking about the idea of the word gamer, right?
Yeah.
We're talking terminology. And if you want to say, that's just semantics, I would reply, yes. Because that's what we're talking about today.
Yep.
And our title already gives away the position. There is no such thing as a true gamer.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't even like using the word gamer.
Yeah, honestly, gamer is a term that was used to just describe people who play video games when it wasn't that big of a hobby.
But I think we can go back before that.
Oh, really?
Yes. Oh, here, finish what you were going to say, though, and I'll rewind a bit.
Okay. I was saying that it used to just be a term to describe people who play video games as a hobby because there weren't that many. It was a smaller community back then. But it's morphed into a term that people use for no true Scotsman fallacies and gatekeeping.
Right, but I'd like to rewind to the term nerd itself.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Because I feel like gamers often seen as a subset of the nerd greater set of culture.
Yeah, because you see the same thing with like people who are into comic books.
Right. I mean, look at most movies or media. In times like the 80s, nerds were a small portion of the greater pop culture. You know, it's why you had like sports were such a big thing, and the idea of like the jock versus the nerd, right? Mm-hmm. And nerds were often picked on and bullied, right? Mm-hmm. But by today's age, nerd doesn't work the same way anymore. If you use the word nerd in the same way to do like the jock versus the nerd, you're really kind of living in the past, I think. I think it shows the age you came from.
Yeah.
It shows you're like an 80s kid, roughly.
Yeah.
Because nowadays, nerd culture is mainstream. It is pop culture.
Yeah, exactly, because it's so accessible to everyone.
Well, it's also ubiquitous because those nerds grew up into the people we have today.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
And even the people who weren't, the ideas of what described a nerd have permeated throughout culture to where probably many of those jocks grew up and they watch Game of Thrones now.
Yeah, and video games also became more mainstream because it became more accessible as a hobby. You no longer had to go to the arcade or set up a D&D session or anything like that.
Plus, I think with the advancement of graphics, imagination was no longer as much of a selling point.
Yeah, you're right. It became more accessible.
It became like TV or movies, which is really all video games are. It's another art form.
Yeah.
But with like nerds, like I say, Game of Thrones is like one of the best-selling, most popular TV shows, right?
Yeah.
And yet, that's literally the video game fantasy genre. Well, maybe not video game, but fantasy.
Yeah, true.
The fantasy stereotype, as we've discussed. Mm-hmm. You ever watch Parks and Rec?
Yes.
Oh yeah, I forgot we watched it together.
Yeah.
There's this one quote from a character called Ben on there where they try to insult him like, you probably are such a nerd. And he responds, well, yeah, but considering the growth of shows like Game of Thrones being so popular, when you're really calling me a nerd, you're revealing how outdated your stereotypes are, or something like that. I'm not getting it right, but he gave that idea via a comeback, and I was just like, oh yeah, he got him. But of course, no one really acknowledged it. They just kind of played it off as like he said something smart and you're not supposed to understand it, whatever.
That's funny.
Whatever. But the point is, I think that nerd has been replaced by gamer. That when the title of nerd became so ubiquitous to become essentially meaningless, people had to find a new, smaller set to group in. Because originally, I think nerds, the idea of a nerd, people would identify with that term and group together in their own smaller communities and find like-minded individuals since they were not the majority.
Yeah, that's true.
And nowadays, I think that term has gone to gamer. I think it's even kind of past it because, again, calling yourself a gamer is like calling yourself a booker. You know,
yeah.
it's like most people read books. Most people listen to music. Most people watch movies. Most people play video games. Calling yourself a gamer is basically saying like, oh, I am that 50% of the population. Right?
Yeah, it's essentially, it's gone the same way as the term nerd in being essentially meaningless.
Exactly. I just think nerd did it first, and then it happened to gamer. Mm-hmm. I guess gamer would probably be a more 90s, 2000 things, but by today's day and age, I think it's just as meaningless as the term nerd. That's why I don't like using the word nerd anymore. Mm-hmm. I was taught it growing up, but I think that was really a holdover from regressive parents.
Yeah.
And the term gamer is something I've never identified with, and all you have to do is do a cursory search on the internet to find horrendous examples that probably make you really not want to.
Yeah, that's true.
And what you're saying is it's like about gatekeeping, right? Mm-hmm. Where the community, they band together under the term gamer to differentiate. Like we're not just a nerd, we're a gamer. We're a group of gamers, right?
Yeah, and then under that, you also have a bunch of people grouping into specific games.
Or like a hardcore gamer.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Where they almost have levels, even though they're not really clearly defined.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
It depends on your subgroup.
And it's the same thing that happened with the term nerd, where you had people who were comic book nerds, book nerds, and video game nerds, and now it's different types of gamers.
Right, but then you also have terms like gamer girl that we alluded to previously.
Oh yeah, where it's like they use terms to discount you,
and that was
from
a big
the community.
Yeah, that was a big thing in the 90s, where I mean, it's a double-edged sword, I think, because women are always held to a different standard in our patriarchal society, right?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Where, on one hand, the gamer girl is, oh, she's attractive and you want to be with her, and she's not like the other girls. Which is almost like saying that like feminism and femininity are bad, and this one is an exception, almost like a model minority, but with women.
Yeah, and then they also have the fake gamer girl who's like, oh, she's not actually into games. She just pretends to be.
So she is one of the other girls, but she's a spy. It's almost like both these concepts involve the hatred of women.
Yep.
Yeah, it's almost like it's misogynistic.
I swear misogyny is just inherent in all pop culture.
I mean, look, it is not a coincidence that women aren't usually part of those groups. It's not a coincidence that, 80s nerd culture, women usually weren't part of it. Mm. And like 90s, like a gamer girl. No one ever specifies, hey, I'm a gamer boy. Look at me, a gamer boy. No. They say gamer girl as it's something that's not the norm.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that's honestly why I really don't like multiplayer games that much, especially MMOs, because the community,
it's so male dominated.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, the video game industry, I mean, I guess we're kind of getting into misogyny in general, so we'll rope it back in a moment, but to continue on this idea, The gaming industry is so male dominated, both from a player stance and a developer stance, at least in the AAA space, that the developers are men. They know their games are played by men, so they make games with the idea of men playing them in mind. It's a positive feedback loop that just goes in on itself to make it even more and more male dominated.
Yeah.
Which is what leads to tropes like 4 players featuring the girl that we mentioned in our very first episode, and we have mentioned that one a lot.
Yeah.
But it's actually not true.
Yeah.
Women aren't a minority when it comes to playing games.
It's just seen that way in our society, but if you look at the statistics, it's really not that way.
It's basically identical, if not more so, on the female side. That might not jive with your preconceived notions, though. How could that be true? And the answer is, well, they play games that are usually considered casual games.
Yeah. Or they play anything they want.
So let me break this down for you. There's video games, right? And it's an equal gender difference. Yet, people that call themselves gamers say, oh, well, the games that women are more predominantly playing aren't real games, therefore they're not gamers and they're not one of us. We have the right to decide what our own definition is and kick out the women.
Yeah, there's that whole thing of like, oh, if you only play casual mobile games, then you're not a gamer.
And that's just not true. This is what we call gatekeeping, which we talked about earlier. We mentioned it. Why don't you define that for us, Kira?
Oh, the whole gatekeeping thing is basically saying, oh, you're not a part of this community and you're not a part of it because you don't meet the standards that I personally set to be a part of this community.
Well, maybe not personally, but at least within the community, there's expectations. And
yeah,
I think
it's also heavily individualized. Some people will be like, oh, you don't meet my personal standards, so I don't consider you part of the community.
Well, they're always
which is ridiculous.
biased.
Yeah.
Because when it comes to loving an art form, most forms of art don't have a standard. It's the same reason that if you try to approach a certain fan base sometimes, they might be like, oh, you like Undertale, right? Or no, what's a more toxic one? Undertale's not toxic. Dragon Ball Z, right?
Okay, sure.
Like, oh, you like Dragon Ball Z, huh? Then who would win in a fight, Goku or Vegeta? Although I guess that's more controversial. Oh, okay. Which is the worst anime of the Dragon Ball series? And if you say anything but GT, they will say, oh, well, you must not be a real Dragon Ball fan.
Yeah.
Because there's an accepted answer that's expected of you. And this, like we said, it's a positive feedback loop. Like there might be for example, just hypothetically, it could actually be the truth that GT is the most popular anime out there in the world for Dragon Ball, right? Mm-hmm. But because they discriminate and gatekeep against anyone who doesn't answer that GT is the worst, you would never know that because their fenced-in community now has a systematic bias against GT because anyone who would have liked it isn't in there anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you have those gatekeepers, you are essentially affecting your entire community and weeding out as what you think as the distasteful parts of the community. Because you didn't ask that question to find out whether that person was really a Dragon Ball fan. You asked it to see if they were your particular kind of Dragon Ball fan.
Yeah,
you wanted to dictate the terms of what it means to be a Dragon Ball fan.
Exactly, and you don't have the authority to do that, you know?
Exactly.
Just because someone doesn't meet your personal standards doesn't mean they're not a fan of the same things you are.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only amount of gatekeeping that's ethical is when you're doing it on ethical lines. Like, if you are going to turn this beloved media into, I don't know, some type of illegal activity that's really terrible, like with... I'm trying to say it like something XXX where you would get arrested for example. I could see maybe that's not a good idea. Maybe we should encourage that.
Yeah.
Right? But what it means to be a fan is up to anyone's interpretation. And if someone is like what you might call a casual fan and is like, oh yeah, I liked all the Dragon Ball anime. They were fun to watch while I was cooking.
Yeah.
That's fine. Maybe they're not as invested, but why do they have to be?
Exactly. Just because they're not as invested as you doesn't mean they're not still a fan.
And don't get me wrong, it can go the other way too. Some people get really annoyed when people are diehard fans, like, oh yeah, I know everything about Dragon Ball, right?
Yeah.
But maybe you love Dragon Ball so much and so ubiquitously, just to keep this example going. It's like, no, you love GT too, because you're such a fan. You love all of it. You would still get ostracized for not hating GT.
Yeah, you're right, actually. And they also use this, can you explain the no true Scotsman fallacy?
Right. So gatekeeping and this idea of being a gamer is very much related to that fallacy. So we've mentioned before, we really like the PBS Idea channel, which I think has been discontinued. But that's where we found out about this. So go look them up if you want to hear. They have a whole big thing on fallacies that's really informative. But the no true Scotsman fallacy is whenever you're in a debate or an argument, anytime you are arguing with somebody and they claim that, oh, well, your argument is invalid because that's not a true X, whatever X may be.
Yeah.
Because you've shifted the debate now from the debate about X itself to whether it truly is even an X at all.
Yeah.
So like the name of the fallacy is Scotsman, right? So the example argument might go, we should criminalize this activity because no Scotsman would do that. Or sorry, no true Scotsman would actually do that activity. Right? And whereas the other person might be like, that what? No, there are plenty of Scotsmen that do that activity. That's not right. And well, they're not true Scotsmen. And you could keep doing that debate forever. Someone else could be like, oh, well, your definition of true Scotsman, like let's say they're making it illegal to steal or something, right? And you might say, oh, well, it's illegal to even own property to begin with because no true Scotsman owns property. And you can just keep moving the goalpost, which is another fallacy.
Yeah, and honestly, like, a part of that is also to get them arguing about the definition of a true Scotsman instead of what you were actually arguing about.
Exactly, because then once you get to that argument, you're not even talking about what you should criminalize anymore. You're talking about what defines a Scotsman.
Yep. Which
I'm guessing is a male person from Scotland.
I guess.
I guess this means that the women of Scotland are off the hook for criminality. Oh, no, it's just anything they do is illegal. Great, that was the opposite of the good thing. Okay. Moving on. Yeah, we talked about how casual games aren't considered real games, right?
Yeah.
I think that it does a huge disservice because it turns out the majority of what people call casual games are women playing them.
Yeah, that's
right?
True.
And AAA games, like what even defines a AAA game? The definition is meaningless. Oh, to an extent. Like, I guess it has a point for categorization if you're talking about the way games are developed, but it's such a nebulous term that from what I've seen on the internet, the best way to describe AAA games is to simply list off games and say ones like these.
Yeah, that's actually true because, like, you could look at, for example, Stardew Valley, which was created by an indie studio, but it has the same level of gameplay and graphics and stuff as other 8-bit games made by AAA studios.
Well, see, Minecraft, I think, is a better example because because Minecraft was literally made by an indie studio, but now it's owned by Microsoft and has a full publishing arm behind it.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
So I feel like the idea of what makes a AAA game, on the face of it, it's an ethereal term that's meaningless and we shouldn't use it. However, because of the way culture feeds into itself, I feel like the idea of a AAA game has existed long enough that it has been retroactively been given meaning by the fact that people think it's real. Now it is.
Oh, yeah, I see what you mean.
I would say that the idea that you can list off a bunch of games, Call of Duty, Assassin's Creed, Saints Row, Mortal Kombat. Help me out here.
Fallout, Elder Scrolls, Smash Bros. Mario.
No. I wouldn't put anything Nintendo does in there because Nintendo's always been kind of in a different ball game.
You can say that, but they have AAA graphics.
A generation later.
Fair enough, actually.
Anyway, with the list that we were making previous to you bringing up Nintendo, all those games, those I think everyone would agree are AAA games. Why? I would argue that
I think it's mainly having a big company or publishing behind it.
I don't think it's just that though. I think originally people used the AAA games to be like, oh, these are the real games, the hardcore games, the games that gamers play, right? Mm-hmm. But that doesn't really mean anything. But because of that feedback loop, I think if you were as like a non-biased outside observer to look at it, I think the best you could come up with for a definition of what makes a AAA game is a large video game publishing corporation is financially backing a game made mostly by men to be played mostly by men. And the publishing company is composed mostly of men.
Yep.
Every single game in that list, I think, will fit that definition.
Yeah.
And part of the reason I feel Nintendo is exempt from that is because they have such a child-friendly and I would dare say female-friendly demographic.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Fair enough.
For that reason, I wouldn't say Minecraft is a AAA game.
Yeah.
It was just bought out by a company that usually makes them.
Yeah, it was very creative game. The only reason I couldn't play Minecraft very much is because there's just not enough direction for me. Mm-hmm. I can't play a game without some kind of quests or something to like push me towards an objective.
And oh, by the way, I just want to say, yes, I know we're like going into a bunch of misogyny, which wasn't really the intention of this episode, but I feel like you really just can't talk about this without bringing it up.
Yeah, exactly, because it's kind of tied up in this.
It's why gamer culture is so toxic. Mm-hmm. It's why Gamergate happened, which was basically just a dumb movement by people who called themselves gamers who were like, feminism is bad.
Yep.
Do you remember their actual point though? Because I'm kind of, okay, that's a bit of a straw man to what their actual point was.
Their actual point was that they hated Anita Sarkeesian for saying that games needed to be feminist and include more female characters.
It was the men's right activism of games.
Yes.
Okay, I see. Yeah, mm-hmm. And that's bad, obviously.
Yep.
That's assuming that things are equal, and as we've already addressed, they are not. So adding more women would actually remedy the problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
To go off on this point, the Fallout franchise, which we love, I've recently been doing some Fallout stuff in my free time, and I was really annoyed this morning when I was looking at something online. Every single hero in the Fallout games is customizable, right? So people might be like, oh, no, Fallout's diverse. It's a AAA game, but you could play as a woman if you want. Yay, right?
Yeah.
No, because even though they do give you that line of rope, right? They do give you that slack. Mm-hmm. They're like, oh, yeah, fine. Be a woman if you want. That's the key phrasing, I think. It's still not considered an equal choice. Mm-hmm. It's actually not the default. We talked about how in all the Fallout advertising, up until the release of Fallout 4, like all of the ads before it only showed the Caucasian male protagonist, even though you could customize it to be whatever you want.
Yeah, you're right.
They only even showed a woman in the trailer after the game had already been out, when they realized like, oh, no women bought our game, or at least not as much. Mm-hmm. But the real annoying thing is how baked into the lore it is. Because every single character that you could make either gender is retroactively defined as male.
Oh, really?
The hero of the first Fallout game was called the Vault Dweller. You could be either gender. But in all following Vault games, they referred to him as a he.
Oh, I see.
The Vault Dweller's grandchild was called the Chosen One. They were the hero of Fallout 2. In all subsequent Fallout games, he's called a he.
Oh, I see.
Because
they're like retroactively gendering the character.
Exactly, because in Fallout 2, you could sleep with a woman and have a child, right? And in all the following Fallout games, that child is canon or exists or whatever you want to call it. They appear. Mm-hmm. And that's always happened. Mm-hmm. So that with all the other Fallouts, it hasn't been long enough to really see the effect of that. But I know Bethesda's going to try to do that. In fact, I wouldn't even be surprised. I can't say this for certain, but in Fallout 4, fans, if you want to look for any reference of the Lone Wanderer hero from Fallout 3, I bet you the he pronoun is used.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
So I just wanted to make that point while I was on. It was really aggravating me today.
You know, now that I think about that, I feel like that kind of makes the Elder Scrolls a bit more progressive because they never do that gender crap in that game.
Do I need to pull out my fantasy stereotype notes?
Okay.
I've never played it, so I don't actually know. But
there are a lot of female leaders of factions and stuff in those games.
Supposedly there are in Fallout as well, but they're a minority.
Yeah, fair enough.
I mean, I would still say that they're assumed male in even the Elder Scrolls series.
Well, the Dragonborn is when they got to Skyrim.
There you go.
Yep.
Exactly.
Because all the advertising was a male Dragonborn, which is stupid.
And that answers the question. Because there's never been a character in the entire history of Bethesda that was assumed female.
Yeah.
It was either like, oh yeah, they were definitely a man, or we just don't know.
Yep.
You never go, oh, they were definitely a woman.
Yep.
Okay. We are getting off track. Listeners, I apologize. It's just stuff we wanted to riff on a bit. But let's get back to about the term gamer, the term that I loathe. We could talk about how sometimes the exclusivity, the gatekeeping, is used for what type of console you are. For example, like a lot of people don't consider Nintendo games to be real games.
Yeah, exactly. Even though they'll play, like, for example, Xbox One or PS4 games, but no, Nintendo consoles are excluded because those are kiddie games. Or
literally, Smash, I think, is the only one they consider hardcore, and maybe some of the competitive Pokemon people. But I know for a fact your average person does not consider Pokemon competitive. I played Pokemon competitively back in the day, and I remember literally getting strange looks from people if I ever mentioned that I played Pokemon.
Wow.
I think this was before I think Pokemon became so ubiquitous today.
Yeah.
It's still,
before Pokemon Go.
I mean, you talk to a baby boomer,
Let's
you
Go.
know,
Yeah.
they're still going to look down on you. Mm-hmm. When we talk about different types of consoles, though, I think we can't talk about the subject without bringing up personal computers.
Yeah. This is often joked about as, the PC master race. But basically, people say that, if you're not playing on a computer, then you're not a real gamer. Because consoles can't possibly render graphics up to the standard that computers can.
That entire debate is, of course, idiotic. Now,
yeah, and I don't think...
What?
I don't think it's brought up as often anymore.
No, it's brought up all the time. Are you kidding me? This is bigger than ever.
Oh, really?
The idea of differentiating between PCs and game consoles is a bigger issue nowadays than it's ever been, as the gap between the two considerably widens.
Widens?
Yes.
I would say it's narrowing. Consoles are getting closer and closer to being able to emulate PC graphics.
No, they're not, because that's not the difference. That's not the gap that I'm talking about.
Oh, I see.
I'm not talking about graphical fidelity. I'm talking about what differentiates a console made for video games as opposed to a computer that's just designed to kind of do everything, but also is customizable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, there's two big problems with this whole debate about consoles versus PCs. Mm-hmm. The first is purposeful reframing of the debate, which is what you're referring to.
Yeah.
Because often what they'll talk about is like, oh, well, PCs are obviously better because of this technical reason and this technical reason. And then people will argue back with consoles. No, my console is just fine and does either just as well in those technical respects or even better. Mm-hmm. Now, often the console people don't have the stats on their sides when they make such argument. But the worst part is that PC people do. So they think that, oh, well, since we're technically right in this regard, that makes our entire point of PC Master Race correct. And you are jumping to conclusions on that one because you're reframing the debate. The debate is not about which is better in specs, right?
Yeah.
The conversation is which is better for you. And the answer is it depends. Mm-hmm. They are going from different approaches entirely. The Xbox and PlayStation consoles, they do a top to bottom approach, where their whole goal is you buy a dedicated system that will just give you video games. You buy it, you turn it on, you plug it in, you are done. I mean, day one patches, but but basically you plug it in, you're ready to play. It's meant to be user friendly. You pay money to get it working out of the box. Obviously, there's going to be a limit on how well that can perform, because on the flip side, you have the personal computer, where you have to have quite a bit of technical know-how to know how to get a good computer, right? You can buy one straight out of the box, but those are like 2 or 3 times as expensive as the console.
Yeah.
And if you alternatively, you could build one yourself, but then that requires knowledge and training.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's almost a form of elitism of the wealthy versus the poor.
Yeah, I get what you mean.
But even then, even if you try to say like, okay, well, so what if it's wealthy or elitist? It's factually better. Only when you're talking about the technical specifications. Yeah, it's capable of doing better graphics. But you know what? There's many PCs that don't.
Yeah, exactly.
Because PCs come in such a wide range. So if you want the best of the best of the best, obviously you will go with PCs on a technical basis. But if you're going for affordability, for most people without the technical knowledge and be able to build an extremely cheap but efficient computer are going to go with the console. And that's great because it allows more people to play those games and enjoy it. For most people, that's going to be the option. For the same reason that when you buy a car to get to work, you're not going to build one yourself.
Yeah.
Because while you could probably build a more efficient car if you're just a great mechanic, most people aren't.
Yep.
That's my first reason. That's my first reason on why this debate's idiotic and why I think it's widening as corporations focus more and more and more on reducing function for easy use as well as data mining, and personal computers get more and more advanced components.
Yeah.
The second reason that this debate is idiotic is that the debate usually revolves the term PC master race.
Yeah.
If you're on the PC side of the argument and you use that term, even jokingly, you're a Nazi. You're comparing yourself to a Nazi. That's what the master race means. It's a term referring to white supremacy, white nationalism, World War II, the Nazi movement.
I actually didn't know that that's what that meant.
Yeah, it's replacing Aryan with PC.
Oh, wow. I did not know that. You've heard that term before, though, haven't you?
Which one?
PC Master Race.
Yes. Considering what I just said, yeah, I'm very familiar with that.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times, like, well, no, it's just a joke. We didn't mean it that way. Or we're just saying PCs are better. One, we disqualified that, okay? They're better in a particular regard.
Well, I think even the people who are on the other side of the argument kind of use this term to throw at them as like, oh, you're being ridiculous. You're acting like a PC master race.
I mean, okay, I can see that because you're kind of taking them down a peg using their own term, but I still feel people don't acknowledge the fact that the term is equivalent to Nazism.
I honestly didn't know the history of that term.
That's terrible. It's terrifying.
Yeah, you're right.
And so there's people out there probably like you using the term ignorantly, not knowing of its true origin. And I would say if you're on the PC side of that argument and you're using all these technical specifications, be like, well, technically I'm correct in the points I care about. I'd say, wow. I'm really wondering right now why you aren't that efficient in checking your accuracy in that regard when using Nazi terminology. It's almost like you have a blind spot or don't care.
Yep.
Now, I understand I'm mostly picking on the PC people because on the console side, most of the arguments are ill-informed because that's the nature of that side of the argument. They're literally people who are like, I don't know how to build this thing. I'm just going to go buy one.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's okay. Have fun.
Yep.
I wish the corporations would mine your data less, and it's not like they don't do it on the PC too, but console people, you get the worst of it.
Yeah.
And I do want to throw out there that if you're going to mod a game, you got to do it on PC. Consoles just don't give you nearly as much options.
Yeah, even with the recent ability to mod certain specific games on Xbox One and PS4, you're always going to get mods that aren't available on the systems.
Yeah, but again, there are ways PCs are better with technical specifications, and definitely not with price.
Yeah.
So it's really whatever your thing is. I do want to point out, I think we've talked about this before on the issue of controllers. A lot of people use this up as like a secondary point where, if you use a console, you have a controller that's just made by the big companies. If you have a PC, you're using a keyboard, which everyone knows is the best way to play games. That is not true. That's just a thing people say. People say everyone knows that, and they just accept it like it's gospel. It's not. Yeah. It's not true. You are telling me that if you had to choose between a device that was literally sculpted and created for human hands versus a rectangle, you would choose the rectangle?
Yeah, I get what you mean. The reason they say that keyboard and mouse is better is, you have more precise control and more buttons so you can do more stuff. It's just like...
Maybe for you, since you've been trained to use that, but that's not true for everyone.
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, I can't play MMOs without controller support because I can't handle the ability slot thing having to press the number buttons on a keyboard. I can't do it. One of the only reasons I was able to play ESO is because they had controller support, and most MMOs just don't.
Well, I want to break this down into a series of caveats as well as supporting criticisms, right?
Yeah.
One, there has been some amount of work in keyboard game development that has revolutionized gaming, specifically using WASD and the arrow keys, right? Those are efficient, right? But two control sticks do the exact same job. Not one is not better than the other. It's whatever you're used to, right? And I also want to mention that, yes, keyboards do have more buttons than controllers. So that means that you have more key press possibilities with a keyboard than a controller. So if you are playing a game that requires more buttons than a controller has, well, obviously, that's a limitation of the controller, or at least the current incarnation of the controller, because you could just make one with more buttons.
Yeah.
Just like you could make a keyboard with less.
Yeah.
So there's that, right?
Yeah.
But I think the most important thing that people fail to realize, the keyboard you're using, look at the keyboard. If you guys have a keyboard next to you, look at it. Look at it. Now let's sing the alphabet together, okay? Q, W, E, R, T, Y, U, I, O, P, A, S, D, F, G, H, J, K, L, Z, X, C, N, V, B, N, M. Now I know my B and M's. You get what I'm alluding to, Kira?
Yeah. The order they're in isn't logical.
Right. Not that putting in the alphabet would be logical, mind you. I was mostly trying to make a sarcastic / facetious point.
Yeah.
But the QWERTY keyboard is a terrible keyboard. It is literally a holdover from the times we used a typewriter. Wow. It is the exact same layout from the modern typewriter. And by modern, I mean like 300 years ago.
Wow.
Oh, and you know why they picked that layout?
Why?
They picked that layout because they wanted to take the most commonly used keys and spread them throughout the keyboard and put them in disparate places far away from each other. Because if they put the most commonly used keys next to each other, the chords would get tangled from excessive use.
Oh my God, wow.
So this is why, vowels, A is on the far left, E is in the upper left corner, and then U, I, O are in the upper right. Because for vowels, I think U is used less often than I or O.
Yep.
And then you have, it's a mess, right?
Yeah.
Like you would think like E and T would be right next to each other, but then they have R wedged between the two.
Yeah.
Why? Because E and T are the most commonly used letters of all.
Oh, I see.
And it was even worse before they invented the shift key.
Oh, really?
Right. So this is a terrible design for the QWERTY keyboard. So if you're going to really talk about the values of the keyboard, I'll probably be more likely to believe you if you bring up its dysfunction.
Yeah.
And you might be like, well, that doesn't matter because we're just going to use the WASD and the arrow keys. No. You were arguing that the keyboard is the great tool for gaming. You weren't arguing for just the arrow keys.
Yeah.
So I feel that it's only fair if you mention that drawback. If you really want to overcome this, you can use a different keyboard layout, such as the Dvorak keyboard instead of the QWERTY, because those have the keys rearranged to be far more efficient when typing.
Yeah.
Again, I mean, that will only affect your gameplay if you do a lot of typing during the game. But hey, maybe you're playing League of Legends and you gotta type with your teammates because you don't have a mic. I don't know. My point is these debates are nuanced and people come at it from different backgrounds.
Yeah.
Being elitist and saying your way is better is really just being a bigot.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right.
You want to carry on with our next subject? I know I went on a bit long with that one.
I was going to say that even within the computer community, you know, the PC master race, there are people who look down on other people for not playing the right games. Like, for example, in the Elder Scrolls community, there are people who are like, all the older ones are better, so if you like Skyrim, you're stupid. You know, that kind of thing.
Okay, I do want to offer a caveat to that, though.
Yeah.
Because sometimes those claims are true for the wrong reasons.
Yes, fair enough.
Because some of the older Elder Scrolls games are better than the newer ones.
Yes.
Just like how Fallout 4 is crap. That's why I think if you're ever going to insult a new entry to a series, really research your points correctly. Make sure you mean it, like I try to do, and you as well, I believe.
Yeah.
So when we insult Fallout 4, we're not just doing it because it's the new thing and we're sticking to our guns. People who love New Vegas are often accused of that, but that's not the case. There's factual evidence to support this, and that's the difference whenever you have factual evidence. And I think the way you can tell is if that point was correct, if I just love New Vegas because I was a traditionalist and didn't like change. You can probably tell by what I think of people who like Fallout 4. I might be like, oh, well, they're idiots. They like that garbage, that new corporate garbage, right? But in reality, the way I act is, oh, well, if that's what you like, that's what you like.
Exactly.
I mean, I would recommend New Vegas. You want to give it a chance. Maybe you haven't experienced it properly. Maybe you'll like it and you just don't even know because you've only recently hopped onto the train. But maybe you have, and maybe you still choose Fallout 4. All right, your choice.
Yeah, the difference is accepting other people's choices and being like, no, you're wrong and I'm right, you know? And there are people in the Elder Scrolls community who even say, like, the first couple games, like Arena and Daggerfall, are better than the later ones. And it's just like, they were messes that were practically unplayable.
I mean, I could imagine they have a point, like, theoretically, let's say that there was some great like lesbian relationship in one of the earlier games, even though it was technically a mess. And they said they thought it was better than all the other games and they loved it because of how progressive it was and how it made them really relate to their relationship with another woman, right?
Yeah.
And I'd be like, okay, I see your point.
But the gameplay itself is difficult.
If they have the wherewithal to recognize that, they're like, oh no, I understand the gameplay is garbage. I just don't think that matters as much as this other thing.
Yeah, I can understand that.
I understand your point. I don't agree, but I understand.
Like, for example, in Morrowind, it's dice roll combat. You can swing as much as you want against someone, but the dice roll on your skill versus their defense determines whether you even hit them or not. And a lot of people say, well, that's shitty. If I swing at someone in a 3D space, I should hit them. And some people are elitist about that. And it's like, yeah, I can understand that that's not a gameplay mechanic that most people like, and that's why they like the later games. But the writing in Morrowind is what's the improvement over the later games.
Can I switch the subject back to the idea of gamer?
Yeah, all right.
We're getting a little into the nitty-gritty here. I wanted to give an example, though.
Yeah.
Because we've already kind of talked about most of our major points. I wanted to specifically harp on something of my own, if that's okay, Kira. You have more to say about Elder Scrolls, or were you good about that?
I'm good.
Okay, cool. So there's this company called Rooster Teeth, and from what I hear, they're a good company. I wish they would hire me. They've always rejected me. I know someone who works there.
Yeah, I know.
Jealous. Anyway, they had this news show called The Know, and I wanted to talk about it specifically because I feel it's a mirror of gamer culture. Because for the longest time that I watched it, it was simply called The Know, and it was a great show on YouTube for any game-related news, or to an extent, nerd-related news, right? They knew their demographic would identify with those terms. Right? Despite that, though, they managed to be, I think, a beacon of journalism. Or at least, what's it called when you're not doing original journalism, but you're doing like second reporting? Whatever the word for that is.
I don't know.
So I thought that was really cool that they were able to do it while being progressive. And I think in large part, this is due to the host, Ashley, of the news program.
I mean, they switched out hosts every now and then,
But I think Ashley was by far the best.
Yeah, I agree with you.
You could tell, though, that she was one of the few women that worked there, because I think only on a few other times do they have another woman besides her.
Yeah, it was only those two. You could recognize that it was only those two that were the women on the show.
So, but the thing is, it really felt like she was trying to be progressive. There were several times that they would talk about, I know she didn't have complete creative control, but she was the face of it, and I can't help but feel like that made a difference because of what happens later. But several times they would talk about things, and they would be progressive in it. Like they would talk about like LGBT video games or indie games, right? They would talk about discrimination in some game companies' workplaces and bad practices.
Yeah.
Right? And I felt like, okay, this might be about video games. It might be about gamer culture, so to speak, even though that they wouldn't use the word gamer as frequently as you might expect. But they were actually trying to give out good news and make the world a better place. And she went away. I don't know what happened. She might have just quit. But for the last like half year or so on The Know, she's just been gone. And they've had some of the other guys that were hosts now take on as essentially full-time hosts. Specifically, this one guy named Brian, I think. Is he Brian?
I don't know.
Whatever his name is. And he is exactly what you'd expect, a Caucasian male that identifies strongly with the word gamer. Ever since he's been in charge, not one time have they talked about an LGBT issue that I can recall.
Yeah, you're right.
Now, they are into gamer rights, whatever that is. Apparently, I think it's supposed to be a subset of consumer rights, so it's not completely wrong, but it's like men's rights. Like, theoretically, giving men rights is not a bad thing. I mean, you want to give everyone rights, though, but that's the crux of the issue. They don't care about giving everyone rights, as long as you give men rights, and usually from the women, right? And that's why I feel like the gamer thing kind of comes across. So sure, they hate microtransactions and predatory corporations, but only when it comes in the way of getting the good game, specifically the AAA game they envision. And so there were several times in the more recent series of The Know that I really hated the news they were putting out. I tried leaving polite comments, but they didn't notice me, obviously. And I don't want to say I hate the guy, but it's just so frustrating, because like one time they brought up Frozen. We talked about Frozen before.
Yeah.
And it was a wonderful movie. You could maybe argue some of the more recent Disney movies are better, but I think Frozen really broke the mold of having to have a romantic relationship in a movie. Right?
I mean, they did have one, but...
Well, they threw one on the side because they were like, we gotta have one. But it wasn't the point of the movie.
Yeah.
The point of the movie was sisterly love. And it was powerful because she was also a strong female protagonist. So many reasons that I think Frozen was a good movie.
Yeah.
And regularly they would take things like Frozen, like they did this one time, but they also would do this in other regards with other franchises and demean them.
Yeah.
Make jokes, making fun of Frozen, insulting you, calling you feminine terms like little girl if you liked it.
Yeah.
And they could only get away with doing that because they know their demographic is so male dominated and so anti-feminist that they would be willing to do that.
Absolutely.
And I would argue that their demographic has always leaned that way. But back when Ashley was in charge of it, they had significantly more LGBT support. right? And I think part of that is like that positive feedback loop. Because she was drawing attention to those issues, more of those people came. She left, they stopped talking about that, therefore fans of the show, like us, left too. I mean, I stuck around just to see what would happen, but I ended up leaving.
Yeah.
I unsubscribed. And it was because of hateful comments like that. Now, the No doesn't exist anymore. They've rebranded entirely. They're called like Inside Gaming or something.
Yeah, and it's because of the whole Machinima thing.
Machinima, why? But whatever, for whatever reason, they've rebranded now. Their rebranding is much more dark and moody colors. I think that's telling, right? But they did this trailer that was supposed to be like, oh, cheeky and funny. We're going to be making jokes while we tell you what we're about and why you should watch us. The only thing I was thinking the entire time was not a single person on the screen wasn't a Caucasian man.
Yep.
I mean, just one person in the background, and you showed like 20-something people.
Yep.
It was a lot of people in the background, and none of them. Are you kidding me? And not to mention that, but they also use the word gamer so many times, really pumping up the idea, the fallacy of gamer culture, which, as we discussed, isn't really a thing. The only thing there is what people have made it into, this patriarchal, toxic group on the internet that people can go to hate women or console players or anyone that they think is beneath them. Yeah. And that's all that show is anymore. And I'm disappointed in you, Rooster Teeth. Please hire me and I will help you fix this. I will be your LGBT correspondent or consultant, whatever. Anything you'd like to add to that, Kira?
You're not any of those, though.
That's why I'm the correspondent. I hook you up with people.
Ah, I see. I see.
Although, I don't feel like, we discussed this on our non-binary episode. I don't feel like I can qualify for the terms LGBT or any of that, QIA, any of it. Well, but I'm definitely not hetero. I'm not completely. I'm weird. Plus, maybe I'm the plus.
That's funny.
Thank you. Now,
I'm the B.
Good. Anything you want to add about that? Either the specific thing I was talking about with the No, or anything in general with gamers.
Honestly,
I can't say that without like hissing. Gamer.
Stop it. Honestly, all these distinctions between what games you play, what consoles you play, whether you play on the computer or not, is all meaningless bullshit. Because at the end of the day, we all play the same games. Whatever you're using to play them, or whatever community you're involved with them. We all are into the same hobby.
Yes, you could play different games, but it doesn't matter. Games are games. You wouldn't do this with, like, are you a real booker? What's the best book you've read recently? Oh, that's not a real book. You're a casual booker.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, which subgroups are you differentiating here?
Yeah.
You know what it really comes across to me?
What?
If we were to make this analogous to probably a more visceral type of bigotry, racism comes to mind, but can you think of a better example? Okay, let's do racism, but let's make up a fictional race, okay? So let's say everyone's like a gray blob, right? Right? Let's take this straight from the Fairly Odd Parents. So let's say that everyone's a gray blob, and you have some groups going, "Oh, well, you're not gray enough. You're too light. You're too dark. You got to be perfect 50% hue gray." Right?
Yeah.
And then within that, you have people going, "Oh, well, you might be gray enough, but you're not blobby enough. You're not a real blobber."
That's funny because they actually made those jokes in that episode of Fairly Odd Parents.
Exactly. And I think that's clever. It was alluding to bigotry without ever actually discussing it.
Yeah.
But I wish it would have been better to do so. But I think it makes the point that often people just try to group themselves into us and them. And it's just
honestly,
another
people,
form of xenophobia.
Yeah, people do that with books and movies, but not to the point that gamers do it. And I think it's because people who play video games are like the men who aren't actually a majority but might be. I don't know.
See,
who hover around there.
I mean,
are louder and more persistent in these differentiations than in any other hobby.
True. I mean, you bring up a good point. We say no one does it with Booker, but that's not exactly true. We're just kind of rounding down because so few people do it that most people never have to worry about it. Unless you're going to be literally meeting the worst literary professor in your life.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? You're not going to often find people that glow, I read Ulysses.
Yeah.
I mean, there are plenty of people that are proud that they read it, but doesn't mean they'll hang it over your head.
Yeah, exactly.
And I do think with movies, it's more common for people to be like, "Oh, well, you just didn't get it."
Yeah, exactly.
But I think thankfully it's not nearly as prevalent as toxic male gamer culture. I hate even using gamer culture. Gamer idea, the simile. What's it called when you're pretending you have a culture?
I'm not sure there's a term for that yet.
I mean, it might be like the AAA thing where it might be real in spite of itself.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to make a joke. Well, white culture. yeah, but that's...
I mean, it's not a bad analogy because you have American culture, but then you have white American culture, Caucasian American, right? And you could argue that really permeates throughout the entirety of American culture. So differentiating it...
Yeah, and the difference between white culture and other cultures is like you're proud of your skin color. You are not proud of your country's culture or the country you came from.
Well, also, you're excluding the parts of your own culture that you don't want to be there.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like... It'd be like saying American culture has nothing to do with rap. Rap is not a part of America. When you'd be wrong, rap is very much a part of America. It's just not the part of America that you identify with.
Yep.
You're picking and choosing.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like picking which parts of the Bible you want. And we will not go down that rabbit hole. I think we should probably start wrapping it up here.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we have a Patreon for Game Theorem that you can check out if you want to give us stuff, or an email if you want to talk to us, give us suggestions or feedback.
Yep.
I'm Kyle.
I'm Kira.
Bye.
Bye.